As I'm sure you all know, EasyCarve has been released, and in order to show you how easy it is to add high quality 3D content to your projects, I've challenged myself to make 6 projects in 2 days. Let's get started. For our first project, I've got this pre-made cupboard door, and I think it would look really nice as a wine cabinet door. So what we're going to do is we are going to put a wine motif right in the center of this, and that's one of the key tips about this, is that we need to start our job off in the center. And the way our machine is set up, I need to orientate the door this way on it. So that's also another important thing to think about. And I need to know what size to make the model. Now, EasyCarve is based on the size of your model, so let's figure out how much room we have for that. So if we measure the center bit, we've got about 600 millimeters. So if we made this about 550, 545-ish, somewhere in there, that would fit in there quite nicely, fill in that space nicely. And then I can make the width probably around, maybe a little over 100 millimeters might be enough to kind of fill in that space nicely and leave us a little bit of padding around the outside edge. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go right into EasyCarve and we're going to start a brand new project. And we're going to do a little search for grapes. And we'll look down through what we have, and I think that probably the vertical grapes ×3 is going to be the perfect choice for this. So we'll select that. And we're going to use the recessed, but the hand-carved kind of edge. I think that'll look nicely, a little rustic in this nice pine board. So I think that'll look good. So we'll select that, and we'll create our project. Okay, once we have that loaded in, we can take a quick look at it to make sure that everything looks right. I think that's going to look really good. So we'll just zoom out a little bit. And we're going to choose our material. So this is softwood, and we're going to be cutting it on this machine, and we'll go ahead and choose next. Now this is where we're going to need to think a little bit about the orientation of this model in this job. So right now it's the wrong dimension, it's running up and down, so we're going to need to rotate that once. That looks better. And then we're going to look at the size of this. So right now we're in inches, but I had said we were going to be in millimeters, so let's change that to be millimeters. And it's really quite wide. So let's change this to be 545. And you'll see that we have our width and our height are linked together. So as I change that, then the height will be updated. And also the thickness of the model will be updated. Now I know that my material is about 18 millimeters thick. So I'm going to change the depth of this to be 10 millimeters, but I don't want it to change the size of my model. So let's go ahead and unlink the depth of this, and we'll change this to be 10 millimeters. There we go. I think that still looks pretty nice. I'm happy with that. Let's go to our material setup now. And we can have the choice now of changing the material thickness at this point, which is really important to have a nice accurate thickness for this. So we're going to make that 18 millimeters. Now in some cases you're going to have a panel door like this, and the panel will be floating in there. And so you're going to need to measure the thickness of that. So you're going to have to make a little bit of a guess because there'll be a gap on the back. But that's pretty easy to do with a set of calipers. In this particular case, it's not a floating center, so we're okay. Now I can go ahead and position the model in my material where I'd like it to be. In this case, I want it all the way to the top. Now we're going to look at our material origin. We're going to start in our bottom left-hand corner. So again, down here in this corner over here. And we are going to make sure that we zero off the top of our material because we're going to put it on our machine, find the center, and we'll zero off the middle of that. We're not going to use any offset for this job. And now we can jump into generating our tool paths. We're going to need a roughing toolpath to start with. That's pretty easy to do. We'll use the 1/4 inch end mill that is chosen for me automatically. We're going to leave the raster angle the way it is, so it's going to cut back and forth, and we can calculate that. Now it'll take a second to calculate that, but once it's done, we're going to have a nice 3D preview that's accurate to what it should look like on the machine if everything cuts as we expect, or our machine is set up as we expect. And there it is right there, and that looks exactly what I'd like to have. We can jump into our finishing toolpath, and we're going to use a 1/8 inch ball nose end mill. Now for this size of a job, that should give me a nice finish. Also with this pine, it's not going to matter if I go too much smaller because I don't think the material is going to hold up for that really fine detail. But at this size, I think it's going to look just great. Again, we're going to leave the raster angle at 0, and I can go ahead and choose calculate. If I didn't want to use that tool, I could have gone in and changed the tool, or I could have added one in, but we're going to use this one that's already set up for me. And there we have the end result, and that looks pretty nice. I think in that pine, it's going to look great. Okay, so a top tip for you if you want to make sure your tool path is exactly right is to turn on the wireframe of your tool path. And that can be accessed right beside the material button here at the top. If I turn that on, you'll see that I can see that wireframe, and you can actually follow the tool path in your head so you know exactly what's going to be happening. Now I can see right away that my start point is in the bottom left-hand corner, and that is not what I wanted to do. I wanted to start right in the center of my material. So I'm going to go back over to my origin, and I can set that to the center and go back to generate my tool paths, and you'll see that the software knows that I've changed something and I need to update or recalculate those tool paths. So let's just go ahead and do that. Okay, once that's all finished up, you'll see that those two icons have turned green. Now for this particular job, I don't want to do a cutout pass, so I don't want to cut all the way through my material. So with that, we're all done. I just need to go ahead now and export out my tool paths. Make sure I have the right CNC machine chosen, and if I do, I can just export those out and save them off to my USB drive and take them over to my CNC machine. Let's go ahead and do that. So to get this fixtured onto our CNC machine, first of all, I'm going to use this piece of straight wood to make sure that it is as straight as possible on the machine. We're going to use some double-sided tape to fixture this down. Once I get that all stuck down, I'm going to be using this ruler to go ahead and find the center of the door, and that's where I'm going to start cutting that grape motif. Now we're going to do is we're going to think about our next project so we can get it in the queue to cut as soon as this one's done. Yeah, that turned out really nice for our first project. Now, while that was cutting, I had a little dig around the labs and I found this nice box. There's a nice solid wood top on it, and I think that's prime for a recessed carving, just like we did right in the middle of that. So let me show you what I've been up to. Okay, as you can see, I've chosen a nice Celtic design that I think will look really quite nice on the top of this box. Now, I have another tip for you that's really going to be helpful later on, especially if you make a lot of projects and save off a lot of tool paths. When you first start up a project, remember to rename it. That way, first of all, you'll be able to find it in your list of projects, but also when you save off your tool paths, your tool path name will start with that project name. So in this case, I'm going to click the untitled text at the top and I'll select it all, and I'll just start typing Celtic box top 1. That's perfect. And now I've already gone ahead and measured up my box top, so let's just go ahead and go through the setup of this job. We're going to be using hardwood. That's the that's the proper CNC machine. Let's set up our model size. In this case, again, we're going to be in millimeters, 100 millimeters, and our X and our Y are linked together, so that should be right. And the thickness of our model, 5 point, that's perfectly fine. We'll just round that up to 6 just to make life easier, but we're going to unlink that again so nothing else changes. Orientation's fine. Our material, we're going to make sure it's all the way to the top of our material, and our material thickness is about 10 millimeters. So we'll change that, that way it'll look fine in the preview. Our material origin, make sure that we set that to the center and the top of our material. No offset this time, just like last time. Generate our tool paths. We're going to create a roughing tool path. And we're not going to use this small tool that's here, so we need to change that. So we're going to select change. And we have a list of tools here, and I can tell the tools that are set up properly for this material because there isn't an exclamation mark at the end. So in this case, I'm going to use that 1/4 inch end mill that we used before, and we're just going to go and calculate that. And we preview that. That looks perfect. Let's create our finishing tool path. And again, I don't want to use that ball nose that it's chosen for me, so I'm going to choose change. And I'm going to use a tapered ball nose that I've set up already using the settings that I found on the Toolmaker's website. So we'll select that, and then we can calculate that. This is a 1/16 tapered ball nose, so I should get nice detail, or as much detail as I can. I'm not going to use a cutout tool path because I don't want it to be cut out of the box top. Now all I need to do is save those off onto my USB drive and walk them over to the CNC machine.
Okay, so let's have a little think while that's cutting about how I might work my model around something that I want to attach to my project. Let me have a look around and see what I can find.
I think this would be perfect as a coat hook, obviously, and maybe we could put some kind of a relief right in the center of that, and that would look quite nice. And then we've got these house numbers. What about a house sign where I have to actually scale my model to make sure these fit into a recess? Let's give that a try. Okay, that looks really good. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and finish that a little bit later, but I'm pretty happy with how that looks. Okay, so for the next project, as you saw, I found this nice set of deer antlers as a coat hook. And I've got this piece of wood that's already been pre-cut. It was just kicking around on the shelf there. Now it'd be really easy to cut a model right in the center of this, as we've already seen. But if I want to introduce this into my project, how would I go about doing that? Well, I think the first idea would be to lay it on top of the wood and then get a sense of what kind of shape of model I'd like to have. So I think an oval model would be good. And something that's going to be around maybe, let's say about 16 centimeters maybe across by about 8 centimeters tall we could go with. And so all I need to do now is just find out where I'd like the center of that to be. So that's not so bad either. I can just kind of figure out that this is going to be about the centers right there. So I can use that little dot to center the XY of my CNC machine. And I just need to make sure in the software I set up the model to be the right size, and we're ace. So let's just go ahead and do that. The steps are exactly like we saw before, so I'm just going to get right to it. Okay, there's the final one of our first 3 projects on day 1, and it looks pretty good. Now, I think what we're gonna do is to put some finishes on these, let them dry overnight, and then we can start the next 3 tomorrow. Here we are, day 2. We got 3 projects cut yesterday. We got a finish on them. Now this morning I'm gonna start out by adding those antlers to the coat rack, and then we'll take a look at how the other ones turned out. Okay, that looks all right. And yes, last night, this one ended up drying up nicely. I put a little bit of an oil finish on it. Looks really good. This turned out nice clear coat on it. And I'm really quite happy with the way that our coat rack turned out. So we'll put that right there. For our next project, we're gonna go ahead and make that house sign that we talked about yesterday. So if you remember, I found some numbers, the 2 and the 0, 20, which is great. Quite fitting because this is Vectric's 20-year anniversary. I've got a piece of beech here that we're gonna use. And then I also, last night when I was thinking about this, I ended up purchasing some short chains and some eye hooks and also some little, I don't know, connectors, I guess you'd call them. And that's pretty much all that we need now to go ahead and make this. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a minute and measure up that piece of beech. That way I can size my model properly for the actual material that I have. So this is about 16.5 by about, we'll say 9.5 inches. So now that I know that, let's go ahead and jump into the app and choose our model that we're gonna cut for our house sign. Okay, so we've got EasyCarve up and we are going to create a brand new project. Now this is going to be a house sign, so I'm going to do a quick search for house signs. And right away you'll see that even before I get house signs, the whole thing typed in there, we've got a few options already. And looking at these, I think that the oaks, the house sign called the oaks, I think will be perfect. So let's select that. Now this is going to be a not in a dish like we've done before, or in a hand-carved look. So we're actually going to cut this out of this piece of wood. So we're going to go with the regular version or the A version, and we'll create our project. Okay, that's all imported in, and that looks pretty good. We've got a nice flat space here to put our numbers, and it should be pretty easy to get it sized up so that we can get those in there nicely. And I like the detail, along with, seeing as we're going to be using those eye hooks to mount this with, there's enough thickness there, I think, that we should be okay if we don't do a whole lot of messing around with the actual model thickness. So let's select our material. This is going to be cut in hardwood, because this is beech, so it's pretty hard. That's the CNC machine we're going to be using. Now let's set up our actual size of this model. Now, when we did the measurements for this, we found out that it was about 16 inches wide by about 9.5 inches tall. That's the usable space of this board. So let's work within that. So we could go with the settings that are here, which it came in at 10 by 7. Let's just see what happens if we type in 11. Let's not worry about that little message here. What it says is that our model's been now scaled up in the Z thickness, so it doesn't quite fit into our material, but that's okay because we can fix that in a minute. It doesn't know how thick our material is yet. So we'll go 11 by 7. I think that's going to be a pretty nice size. If we grab our ruler here, 11 by 7. Yeah, so now that we've got that size, I think that's going to be all right. We need to make sure that our numbers are going to fit in there. So if we look down on the top of our job here, we're going to use our grid that we have here to help us decide if we need to go any bigger or maybe we can go smaller. I guess we'll see in the end. So we've got our numbers. Let's measure the height of our number. It looks like it's about 3 inches tall. That's the number 2. I suspect the 0 is the same. So if we look at the grid in the background here, we can fit in a number between 6 and 3 without any problem at all. So we should be able to fit that into this job as you see it there, which I'm quite happy with that. And the actual thickness of our model now is 0.8173. And of course, that's why we're getting this warning, because if I go ahead and look at my material down here, you'll see that it's come in at about 0.75, so about 3/4 of an inch. Now we have no idea what that is, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab our calipers, and we're going to get an exact measurement of the thickness of this board, and that's going to help us figure out whether or not what our thickness is, excuse me. So let's go ahead and have a look at that. And that looks like it's going to be around 0.96, so almost an inch. So we've got a lot more space we can work with. So let's put in 0.96 here. And that warning has gone away now because we've adjusted that. That gives us a little bit of extra backing to it, which I think would be okay. Yeah, you can see the extra backing right there. I think that's all right. So I'm happy with that. So let's now go and set our material origin. In this case, I can go ahead and choose to set it on the bottom left. Now, in the past, we've gone ahead and set it in the center, but for this one, the bottom left is perfectly fine. And we're going to zero off our material surface. That's good. And we are going to go ahead and generate our tool pass. Now, like before, I'm going to create a roughing pass using a 1/4 inch end mill and a finishing pass using a 1/8 inch ball nose. Okay, now that we got those two tool paths already set up, let's have a look at our cutout pass. Now, this is the first time we've looked at this before, so there's a couple things we need to keep in mind with this particular piece of material. Because I'm going to be cutting this sign out of this, then I'm going to have to think about the proper ways to fixture this to my CNC machine. Because we don't have tool path tabs for a cutout pass, we'll need to consider all that stuff when we get over to our machine. And one other thing that's nice about all of the components that you get with your EasyCarve subscription is they come with an easy way to create a cutout pass. You don't need to do any thinking at all. We just include that pass with the actual 3D model. So if whether you use it or not, it doesn't really matter. As you've seen, we didn't use it in the past, but this time we should use that. So we're going to go back and use our 1/4 inch end mill that we used to do our roughing with. And we are going to not give any kind of, we're going to write down to 0 actually on our final pass. We want to go all the way through our material. We might want to go through, well, we'll just leave it at that, at 0. That'd be fine. Hopefully we've measured that accurately enough and we can calculate that. And we'll see in the end as we've got a nice clean cutout pass all around our project. And I think that's going to look great. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to save off all those tool paths and we're going to go over to the machine and we're going to get this fixtured down so it's safe, and then we'll get these cutting. This is a really great cut. It really shows off the high quality CNC ready content that powers EasyCarve. This job is perfect. It looks great. Even using the 1/8 inch ball nose end mill that I did, it looks exactly what we saw in the software. You can see all the little details in here. I'm really excited to get this one finished up. So let's run the cutout pass, get it out of here, and then start on our next project. That looks really nice. I'm happy with that. Now let's test the numbers on here to make sure everything fits okay. So we've got the 2 and the 0 for 20. And yeah, I think that's gonna work out really well. So right now I'm gonna leave this for now and we'll finish it up in a little bit, but we're gonna move on to our next project. In this project, we're gonna create a piece of egg and dart molding. Just not one piece, but 2 pieces of the same piece of material. And the idea is I'm gonna use the offset in our software to be able to cut one egg and dart trim piece and then another egg and dart trim piece. And I may even make it so that I don't need to do a whole lot of tool changes if I do everything perfectly. So let's get right into that. Okay, so let's go ahead now and start a new project again. And we're gonna be looking for the egg and dart trim. So if I just type in egg, you'll see right there, the egg and dart molding. So we'll select that and we're gonna use the A version like we did, or the regular version like we did for the house sign that we made. So we'll create a project with that. Now the idea with this is that I'm going to go ahead and cut one of these at this end of the board and then one just a little bit further down. And I really don't want to have to set up my machine every time I do this. So we're going to create a file that's going to cut one version of it right at this end. And then we're going to create another version of the file, just name it differently, that we're going to use an offset to move it down the board a bit. And then we'll save off those tool paths. And then I think what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to go ahead and run the roughing pass for this one, and then run the roughing pass for this one, then the finishing pass for this one, the finishing pass for this one, and then the cutout pass for this one, and then in turn the cutout pass for the last one. Now in this case, we may not actually even use a cutout pass because we're going to make it so that our model is at the very back of our material. So there's a fairly good chance that when we run our finishing pass that it will be loose and we'll be able to just take it out of there. So here we have the egg and dart molding and it looks really good. We're going to use softwood. That's the right CNC machine, so we'll just select our size. Now the model comes in at 10 inches and I'm pretty lucky in this time around because that's going to fit perfectly into my material. So it's 10 by 2.5 or 2.2, excuse me. And this material is quite a bit longer than 10. I think it's like, I forget what it is now, but we can fit at least 3 or 4 of them in here. And the width of it is about 3 inches. So it should fit in here no problem at all. And the thickness is about 0.95 of an inch. I've already sort of pre-thought this one through, so we're okay. So what we're going to do is we are going to just change the thickness of this to an even number. So we're going to unselect the link the height with the width and length, and we'll change this to 0.7 just to make life a little bit nicer for us to work. It's going to tell us that there's a problem with that because it's gotten too thick for our material, but that's okay. We're going to our material now and we're going to change this to be 0.95, and again that warning will go away. And instead of actually cutting this at the very top of our material, we're going to push it all the way to the bottom. So we're going to need to do a little, when we rough it, we're going to rough away a lot of the top of this. But this will mean that I'm going to keep the thickness that is in the model on the back side of this, which I think will be fine for what we're going to do. We'll change our material origin. So we're going to zero off the bottom left corner and off the top of our material. And this offset right here at the bottom, this is what I was talking about a minute ago. This first one we're going to leave at 0, 0. So it's going to cut exactly where we tell it to. But in the next version, we're going to change the X or the Y offset, excuse me, to shift it along so that we can actually cut it somewhere else on our board. So let's go ahead and generate our tool pass for this. We'll start off with our roughing pass, and we're going to use that 1/4 inch end mill. I think that'll be perfectly fine. And we'll calculate that. It's pretty nice. I'm happy with that. So let's now go ahead and do our finishing tool path. We'll use that 1/8 inch ball nose that we used before. We'll calculate that, and there we have it. That looks really nice. Now we are going to create the cutout pass, but like I said, we may or may not use that. So I'm just going to go ahead and create that. We're going to use that 1/4 inch end mill again, and we can just calculate that. And if we look at our wireframe of that, you'll see there it is right there. So that looks exactly what we'd like it to do. Now, what I'd like to do is, as I mentioned before, is we should actually name our project so that the name will be attached to our toolpath. So we just call this egg and dart. Okay, we can export out those toolpaths. That's the right CNC machine. We're going to export them all out. So let's go ahead and do that. And there we have it. Now we can click OK. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our material setup here, and we're going to change our material origin. Now, depending on your machine, you're going to want to use your offset, again, your X or your Y, depending on how your machine is set up. Now this is perfect not only for doing something like this, but let's say you have a part that's way back on your CNC machine and you want to put some relief carving in it, and you know the actual location for it, then you can go ahead and offset your toolpath so your machine will go back in that corner and cut your relief carving, maybe in a cupboard door or something like that. So we're going to go and change the X. We're going to go with 12 inches, and you'll see what happens is it slides it across 12 inches. So our first one we're going to cut right here, and our next one we're going to cut over there. Now this is 10 inches long, remember, so there's a 2-inch gap between the two, which is going to be all right because I need room for my cutter to go in there along with a little bit of support. So I think that'll be perfect. Let's go to generate our tool paths, and you'll see that we have the same tool paths, the same cutters. We just need to go ahead and recalculate all of those. And if we wait for a few seconds, that'll all get taken care of for us, and we can save off those tool paths. And again, they'll be saved off with a different name, because we're going to go, before we save those off, and change the name of this actual project. Okay, now all those tool paths have been recalculated. So before I export those out, we're just going to rename our file offset 12, so we know how far we've offsetted it. And we'll export those tool paths. Those are all the same ones we want to save out. So let's export those. And you'll see that now we've got all of our tool paths here. So we've got 6 altogether. 3 of them are named without the offset 12, and the other 3 have the offset 12 at the end. So all we need to do is just run these, one without the offset 12, one with, back and forth as we change our cutters, and we should get what we want. There's one other bit of complicated stuff we need to think about, is we need to actually get this board mounted on our CNC nice and straight. And so we'll take a look at that in just a second once we get over to the machine and get it warmed up again. One of the nice things about EasyCarve is that we optimize the roughing toolpath for you so you don't cut over the same place twice. That way we're going to make a really efficient toolpath and save you tons of time. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to run that offset toolpath, the one that I created that was 12 inches offset on my X, and it's going to end up starting right about here. It's the same roughing toolpath, I've just shifted it over a bit. So for this last project, I thought that I would make an architectural piece, a ceiling medallion, or a rosette, maybe you'd call it. And I had a little look around the labs here, and I found a big piece of HDU. That's this right here. It's quite heavy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a piece out of it. I'm going to cut it down to a piece around 20 inches square, which I think will make a decent sized medallion. So let's go ahead and see if we can find a file that we can use to make that with. So let's start a brand new project, and we're going to type in our search. We'll type in rosette, and we'll have a look at what we have here. And let's just see. I think I like this one right here, rosette number 9. So we're going to select that, and we're going to use the regular version of this because we're going to cut it out. It needs to be applied to the ceiling. If I wanted to, I could cut the center out of it. That way we could actually put a light fixture in there if we want to. But for right now, let's just pretend we're going to cover up a hole in the ceiling with this nice architectural piece. Now once it gets loaded in, we're going to have to think a little bit about the material that we're going to be using. In this case, our options right now are hardwood, MDF, medium, and softwood. Well, that's not what we're going to be cutting into. So we're going to need to add a brand new material. So let's click Add a New Material. And we're going to take a look through our selected materials here, and you'll see that listed here is not HDU. Oh, there's it there, HDU foam. So let's go ahead and select that, perfect. And we can add that material, and you'll see that we now have HDU foam in there. So we can choose that from our list over here, and we can make sure we have the right CNC machine selected, and we'll start now to think about the size of our model. Now in this case, the piece is going to be about 20 by 20, so let's make it 18 by 18. I think that'll fit nicely into that. And we want to change the thickness of our model. The material that you just saw is about 1.5 inches thick. So let's make this 0.125. But before we do that though, make sure that we unlink the height and the width from this, okay? Because if we leave it linked, then we're going to end up having everything shoot out of proportion again, and we don't want that. So let's go 1.25. And we can have a look in the 3D view to make sure that's what we want. And I think that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. Seems like nice proportions, get lots of detail in there. I think that'll be good. So let's have a look at our material next. Our material thickness, as I said, is 1.5, so put that in there. And we're gonna put a little bit of room at the top of this, just a little bit. So let's maybe put like 0.05 at the top. And that will allow us so that if the top of our material isn't flat, which normally HDU is, but if it's not, then we'll actually cut away some of that and make sure that we have nice rounded shapes and so on without any flat spots. Our material origin, we are going to zero from the bottom left-hand corner, and we are going to zero our Z off the top of our material. We're not going to use any offsets like we did with the egg and dart trim. We're just going to leave it at 0. Now we can go ahead and generate our tool paths. Now in this case, I'm pretty confident that I don't need to do a roughing tool path because it's pretty soft. And the tool that I'm going to use is going to be a tapered ball nose, a 1/8 inch tapered ball nose. And that should actually just rip right through this like butter. So we're going to skip the roughing tool path. Now I can only do that because, as you heard, I understand the way the characteristics of my material, and also I know what tool I'm going to use. I know a lot about my machine I'm going to be cutting with. So I'm not too worried about any of that, but make sure that you choose the appropriate set of tool paths, the appropriate tool for the material you're cutting into, and know your machine so you can set up proper tooling for that. So let's go right into our finishing tool path, and we're going to select a tool. Now, as you can see, there are no tools that are compatible with this material. They all have exclamation marks at the end, but I'm going to choose the tool that I want. And then you're going to notice that we have an exclamation mark right at the very end of the name. Now, if I go ahead and click on that, at the top of the screen, you'll see that no feeds and speeds are saved for this machine material combination. So we're going to click Edit to fix that. And you'll see that we're brought right to the tapered bull nose that I selected. And you'll see that it's been set up for hardwood, and it's got all of the geometry already set up for me. So why would I do that again when I can just go ahead and add this to the material that I currently have selected, which is HDU. So I can add feeds and speeds to that. And you'll see that it's got my CNC machine listed. It's got the HDU foam. And now I can go ahead and adjust the feeds and speeds to make them appropriate for this, this job and the material. So that looks pretty good. We're going to make this 18,000. Now, as I said, you're going to want to set these up so they're safe and appropriate for your machine. So don't go by these numbers. They are only for me. So I'm going to add that entry now, and you'll see that now I have 2 entries for that one tool. So whenever I pull out that tool, I know what material I'm going to use, they'll always match up, and I'll be able to know that I've got the right stuff in there for feeds and speeds. So let's go ahead and go back, and we can just calculate that. Let's have a look at that, and that looks really good. I'm quite happy with the detail that I'm going to get there. If I wanted a bit more detail, I could have used that 1/16, but it would have taken double the time. So I don't think I want to do that. I think I'm happy with this. Let's create a cutout pass now. That's pretty simple to do. We need to do the same thing we did a minute ago, which is I need to select the tool. I don't have one set up for this material, but I do for another material. So let's select that. Let's click on the exclamation mark. Let's go to the very top here and click on Edit. And now I can add my feeds and speeds for the HDU foam. So we'll go ahead and just quickly do that. That all looks good. I'll add that entry, and I can go back now, and I've got that tool all set up, and I can calculate that. And we have a look at the finished part, and that looks really nice. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over to the CNC machine. I'll go ahead and double-sided tape and screw down my material to that, and then we can start cutting after I save off my tool paths and get them to the machine. Mission accomplished. 6 projects in 2 days. I think they look pretty good. And as you can probably tell already, if I had to purchase those 6 models, I easily could have paid for a 1-year subscription to EasyCarve. If you're still not sold, why don't you go over to easycarve.com and try our free trial and see what you think. You've got a choice of 4 different models that you can go ahead and cut on your own CNC machine. Make a few products and see how they do. If you like what you see here, please follow us on all of our socials. If any comments, please leave them and I'll get to them as soon as I can. And until next time, keep cutting and having fun.